I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to go through a little brief review, I guess, of Chapter 3 concepts, and then we'll turn to any questions you might have. So let me do that.
I meant to come last Thursday. I just totally spaced it. I was frustrated when I realized I missed it. Now it's in my calendar. So.
I figured you got a better offer, so I wasn't offended.
No.
Almost anybody's a better date than me. All right. So let's see. You should be able to see this summary of debit credit rules. And so I think the first concept I would just like to sort of get out there, for people who've worked with debits and credits, it's not hard. But when it's brand new, it's almost hard for everybody for some reason, like just remembering these little rules. And so the first thing for me that really helped me grab hold of the concept was getting out of my mind the idea that like a credit was like a good thing because it put money in my bank account, and a debit was a bad thing because it took money out of my account. Because
sort of flipped.
Right, yeah, debits and credit, there is no value judgment in them. Honestly, debit means left and credit means right, just as much as if you were on a sailing ship, we would say that port is left and starboard is right. It doesn't have any more value than that. And that's because some accounts are increased with debits and some are decreased with credits, and vice versa. So you can't really put any sort of predicate of value.
You can't say one's minus and one's positive.
Right. It's
and
just
like one's adding, one's subtracting. You can't do that.
Right. So instead we say a debit occurs on the left-hand side of a journal entry and a credit occurs on the right-hand side. So that's the first step for me, at least, of getting to understand it better, because I was always trying to put some value on it. The second thing is then to kind of memorize how they work, how debits and credits work. And so something that's helped me memorize it is remembering, first of all, this equation: assets equal liabilities plus equity. So that, I guess, if I can memorize that assets increase with a debit and decrease with a credit, then I also know that liabilities and equity, because they're on the other side of the equal sign from assets, are going to behave in the opposite way. So I feel like by memorizing the one and remembering the relationship between them, I have all three of them memorized, so to speak.
Is this picture somewhere in our homework, or?
It's in the textbook, in the ebook, and also I have included.
I don't have the ebook, so.
Okay.
It's in the link that the percent in the beginning of the week, that he has a bunch of links there. There's some that one of them has this picture and then has another one with the blue background. I find the other one it's more helpful.
Yeah, so the other one I have.
So is this not in the hard copy, only in the ebook?
It should be in both. It should be in both.
I mean, I see like, let me find it. I mean, I see like, I've got the arrows like that has, but they're not all on one page.
So
I think it is split with examples. That's what it is. Yeah, it's not all compressed together.
Right. So the one I have up on the screen right now, this is what I have. One of them that I have linked in the additional study content. If you use that link that's in the announcements.
Mm-hmm.
And some people really think this one's easier, because what it does is it shows assets, and then it shows that they're increased with a debit, decreased with a credit. Liabilities are the opposite: decreased with a debit and increased with a credit, and owner's equity. And then revenues. So it's like I call it a cheat sheet, but I don't want you to actually cheat. So I call it a guide sheet. How about that? No cheating involved. Anyway.
I don't know that other one that you showed. I don't know. That might.
And again, so I try to give a couple examples, because different people's brains, some people really respond to these bright colored. My wife's a very visual person. I'm not. I'm like, give me a spreadsheet, and that makes me happy. I like the numbers. That's probably why she's an artist and I do this, right? I would just have different brains. Anyway, so again, if I know that assets behave one way, increase with a debit, decrease with a credit, and then liabilities and equity are the opposite, that helps me memorize all three of them for me. And then I have to just remember, expenses behave one way, they increase with the debit and decrease with the credit, and revenues are the opposite. And dividends behave like expenses do. So honestly, it seems like a lot, but there's kind of like 6 things to memorize here. That's all, because you just have to memorize, each of these account types: assets, liabilities, equity, revenue, expense, and dividend, and then whether it increases with a debit or increases with a credit. That's it. The only other thing is the concept of a normal balance, which they introduce in this chapter. I think that's another thing that seems really complicated, but honestly, all it means is the side of the journal
that increases
it. That's it. That's all it means. Because if you had an asset, you would expect the asset to have either a 0 balance or positive, and so the side that increases, it's going to be the normal side. We would expect assets to have a debit balance. We would expect liabilities to have a credit balance. It's the normal balance, etc. So really what it takes is just working with this and putting in a little bit of effort to memorize them, and it won't be too bad. It's not for most people. I have friends who are CPAs, and they go, why do you make people memorize this? You don't have to memorize this. Computers do all the work now.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer to them is the same reason we have to memorize our times tables. We have computers that will do all the math for us, but when we're making entries, we need to be able to quickly recognize what are we debiting and what are we crediting.
And if you don't recognize it, then it's probably hard to realize where you've made a mistake.
Well, and it really slows you down because you're having to think through the whole process each time instead of just, it becomes automatic to you as you do it more. And so it's just kind of like a basic concept that underlies all of accounting. In fact, this will never go away. So the concept of debits and credits will be here through the whole course and through the whole managerial accounting course too. So you've got to get it down, or else it's going to kind of haunt you. And not like the cool kind of haunting that you can make a movie out of.
I sent a little file, which is my screenshot of that one of the links you sent. So that's been very helpful when I was solving problems. I use that a lot because it has dividends separate, and a lot of times it's not easy. I have a question about that though.
Okay.
So is dividends acting like an expense, because in the real world, when you're gonna pay dividends, it's like an expense from the business.
That's why you subtract it.
Yeah, so a dividend does behave like an expense because in almost every way it is an expense, with the exception that you don't get to deduct it from your net income. So an expense, you take your revenue minus your expenses, and that gives you your net income. Dividends don't reduce your net income, because instead of paying money out of the business for the operating cost of the business, which is what an expense is, a dividend is paying money out of the business to the owners. And so it's still paying money out of the business, but you can't claim it as an expense because it's the owners taking their share of the profits. And so the short answer is, yeah, dividends behave exactly like expenses from a journal entry standpoint.
Okay,
does that help, or is that more confusing?
Yeah, but it helps.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think what's most instructive from this point is to look at some examples of journal entries and kind of walk through the process. So
can I take a picture of this before you get rid of it?
Sure.
Because I'm not seeing it anywhere else.
And actually what I pulled this from is in the read, study, practice area. When you click on the chapter you're on, one of the things it gives you is like a review, a PowerPoint review. And I just stole their PowerPoint and then deleted out a bunch of the slides that I thought were extraneous. So we only had a handful here instead of having to go through 50 slides. But this is one of the slides out of that if you wanted to go find it in there.
Okay.
That's where I pulled it from.
All right.
Anyway. All right. So what I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through a few of these journal entries, and then also show you how they get posted to the ledger. You've probably already done some of this as you've been messing with the homework, but I just want to talk through the process. And this is the process I still go through in my brain today when I'm having to do it in real life, not in a classroom setting, except that it's a lot faster because I've done it for 20 years, right? So that makes you get faster at it. All right, so these are the steps. Determine the type of account involved, determine what item increases or decreases and by how much, and then translate those increases and decreases into debits and credits. As obvious as that sounds, a lot of people kind of try to skip through that and they get really bogged down. So, so here's our event. On October 1st, the stockholders invest $10,000 into the business, the Sierra Corporation. So our basic analysis is that our cash is going to increase and our common stock account is going to also increase. And then we have to say cash is an asset, so the asset's going to increase with a debit, and common stock is a equity, and so it's going to increase with a credit. After I kind of go through that whole process, then I'm ready to post it to create my journal entry, and that's this part right here.
I don't think I've done journal entries yet.
So cash, so our debit entry is always the one that's listed first, and it's on the left. So we have this little line that goes down the middle of it. The left side's the debit side, the right side's the credit side. So when I translate that cash increasing, that's a debit, I'm going to put cash, $10,000 on the debit or left-hand side, and then common stock, $10,000 on the credit or right-hand side. Then what I'm going to do is post this journal entry into what's called a ledger. And a ledger is what lets us keep the balance of each of our accounts. So because this is a brand new company, they didn't have any balance in any of their accounts. So the cash account, we show our debit here on the left-hand side, and our common stock account, we show our credit on the right-hand side. We would say each of these accounts has a $10,000 balance, cash having a $10,000 debit balance, and common stock having a $10,000 credit balance. So let's go through a couple more examples and maybe it'll start to, the thing with this is I'm going to explain it all to you. I'm going to show you examples, but until you do some of them, it's going to be hard. Okay. It's like when someone tries to explain a new board game or a card game to you and you're like, yeah, I just need to play a couple hands because I don't really get what you're trying to tell me.
So the step one where it says determine what type of account is involved, wouldn't it be accounts because you're trying to determine, okay, the $10,000 is going to go to my cash account
yes.
and the common stocks account? Wouldn't it?
Yes, like, accounts. That's a good correction to that because there's always at least two accounts involved.
Okay.
So that's good. All right. So here's event number 2. On October 1st, Sierra borrows $5,000 using a 3-month 12% note payable. So again, we would say, okay, our cash is increasing because we're borrowing money, and then our liability, notes payable, is also increasing. And then I would say, okay, if cash is increasing and cash is an asset, that's going to be a debit to cash. And if a liability is increasing, liabilities increase with a credit. So then I can make my journal entry. Here I'll enter cash, $5,000 on the left hand or debit side. Notes payable, $5,000 on the right hand or credit side.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Does this sort of tie in with the trial balance then, with the debits and credits?
Yes, absolutely. We'll get to that.
Okay.
So now we'll see when we post it to our ledger, we'll see that our cash account has had a debit of 10,000 and a debit of 5,000. So we would say the cash account has a debit balance of 15,000 at this point. Our notes payable account has a $5,000 balance on the credit side, or a credit balance of 5,000.
So these are both in the positive.
Yes. All right, the third event, Sierra uses $5,000 cash to purchase equipment. Okay, so what's happening? Our cash is going down because we're using it to buy something, and our asset equipment is going up. So now then I say, what type of accounts are they? Cash is an asset account, so it will decrease with a credit. And equipment is an asset account. It will increase with a debit. Then I'm ready to create my journal entry. I'm going to debit the equipment account, or put it on the left-hand side of 5,000, and credit the cash account. So now you can see when I post it to the ledger down here that cash has a $10,000 debit, a $5,000 debit, and a $5,000 credit. If someone were to ask me what's the balance of this account, what I would do is I would add up all my debits and then subtract out my credits. So we would say this account currently has a $10,000 debit balance to it. Equipment has a $5,000 debit balance to it. Did that make sense? Mostly? Let's keep going through some. Okay, we'll keep going through some examples. Yeah, stunned silence.
Well, if you go to if everyone who's on here has done the first homework that was due today, then maybe we can look at some of those, because I have questions on some of those.
Okay, well let me move through a few more of these, and then I'll skip to the end of this, because I actually have like 11 of these events if we wanted to look at them, but it starts to get old, kind of stale, like the bread on my shelf. All right, or like my dad jokes. Okay, on October 2nd, Sierra receives $1,200 cash advance from a client for guide services that they are going to perform in the future. So here we say, okay, if I'm receiving money, my cash is going up, and cash is an asset, so I'm going to debit cash. And then I'm going to have a liability created. If somebody gives me money but I haven't earned it, then I'm going to create a liability called unearned service revenue. And so that, because that's a liability and it's increasing, that will be a credit. Then I'll post them to my ledger, the debit of the cash, the credit on unearned service revenue. On October 3rd, they received $10,000 in cash from a Copa company for guide services provided. So this is a little different, because now our cash is going up, but instead of it being a liability, instead of us owing something to someone, this is our revenue is also going up. Okay, so a cash is going to increase with a debit, and revenues are going to increase with a credit. So we debit cash 10,000, we credit service revenue 10,000, and then we post them to the appropriate sides of our ledger. Cash on the debit side, service revenue on the credit side. And I'm going to do a couple more of these, but faster, like we're doing it now. October 3rd, they pay their office rent in cash, $900. So now we have an asset, cash, going down because we're paying something, and an expense going up. This is confusing because it shows it as a negative here. So you think the expense is going down, but the expense is going up, but it's a negative to the stockholders' equity. So I think that's confusing the way they show it. So expenses increase with a debit, so we'll debit rent expense $900. Cash decreases with a credit, so we'll credit that account $900, and then we'll post it to our ledger. So now I'm going to skip to the end here, where we have a summary of all of the journal entries we just made. So, and this is what they, this is in the olden days when we actually did journal entries by hand. This is really what it looked like. You would, in essence, have a page in the book for, depending on the volume of entries you were doing, either one page per day or a page per month or whatever you needed to write down these journals. So a journal is just a chronological summary of the transactions that occur in the business, written in debit credit format. Okay, so these are all the journal entries that we just made, plus the ones I skipped past. And then this is the ledger. So the ledger, sometimes they call this T accounts. And so all we did is we transfer each of those journal entries over to the ledger, debits on the debit side, credits on the credit side, and then we tally up a balance. To find the balance, what we do is we add up both sides, the debit side and the credit side, and then we subtract the smaller side from the larger side. So cash ends up with a debit balance of $15,200. supplies with a debit balance of $2,500, prepaid insurance, etc. Our revenue account has a credit balance of $1,200. Common stock has a credit balance of $10,000, etc. So the journal or the trial balance that you had asked about and that you've probably already done, you've seen in some of the recordings that your fellow students or maybe that you had to make, is just a summary of the balances in the ledger. So you take each of these balances, and instead of having all the information, you just have the balance and you post it to a trial balance. Trial balances are always listed in the same order, which are assets, followed by liabilities, followed by equity, then dividends, then revenue, then expenses. They're always in that order. So the balance sheet accounts, assets, liabilities, equity. There's a statement of retained earnings accounts, which is dividends, and then the income statement accounts, revenue and expenses.
Oh, I don't think I did that.
So they're always in that order. And then you have the debit balance or the credit balance of each account, and in the end, your debits and credits should balance. So that's what a trial balance is and what it's for.
So can I?
Go ahead.
So for the trial balance, like the list that was with the homework problem, I just put it in there in the order that they had it there. So this is the order that it's supposed to be in?
Yeah, and a lot of times in the homework problems, you'll notice that they do this in that order anyway. We have the asset accounts, then the liability accounts. So they'll do it in the same one anyway.
I don't know if it was in that order or not. I'd have to go back and look at the problem.
Well, did you get it right?
I did, but it doesn't. I got the right answer. Like I put everything in the right columns, but as far as like the order of cash, supplies, blah blah blah, I don't know. Okay. I put those in the order of what it was in the problem.
Right.
I don't think it really mattered because I remember putting cash like on the third line and then.
Right. So it's possible that they were just trying to not, whoever set the problem up in Wiley wanted to make it, so you didn't have to worry about that for now, just to give you first the concept of the debits and the credits. I'm just saying, in real life, if you see a trial balance, it's going to be in that order, is what I'm telling you. Assets, liabilities, equity, dividends, revenues, expenses. They're always listed that way.
Which is the form, like the accounting equation?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
And it fits with the statements, right? Assets, liabilities, and equity. That's on a balance sheet, and then revenue and expenses are on the income statement, and then the dividends are what we need as we do our statement of retained earnings. Okay. Anyway, so that's what I had to present. And now I would be, if you would like, you want me to look at some sort of a specific homework assignment or something like that, I would be more than happy to do that, or try to answer any other questions you have. I realize no amount of reviewing is going to answer all of the questions right now because you're still learning the material. But Janice, you had a question?
On 3.1, there's what I thought it was, but it wasn't one of the choices, so I put something else.
Okay.
And so I want to understand, I got everything else right except for that one. And it said, so we had to say.
So you're talking about homework 1.
Yeah, exercise 3.1. It says, describe the effect of each transaction on assets, liabilities, and stockholders' equity. So 6
now, when I bring it up on my screen, it has all the answers. So, don't just write the answers, learn from it. All right.
No, well, I'm not looking at your screen. I'm looking at my screen at the moment.
All right.
So, incurred advertising expense on an account. So that would decrease your asset, right?
No.
No?
So when I incur an expense, what that means is that I have used the product or service in some way, but haven't paid it yet. Okay.
So this should have been in the expense, which was under stockholders' equity.
Right. And in these early chapters, I personally don't like the way this book does it, but in these early chapters, they really are not considering revenue and expenses as separate accounts. Instead, they focus on how revenue and expenses impact stockholders' equity, which is okay. But later you'll see that they kind of consider revenues and expenses as separate accounts altogether.
I guess I didn't pay attention to the occurred. So it would do something to notes payable, which is a liability, right?
Yeah, probably it would be
on
called
account.
Yeah, it would probably be called like either on an account payable, or sometimes they would call it advertising payable, something like that. It would be a short-term payable.
So that I'm going to go back to your, all right, make you big again. Viewing option. No. I don't know how to make it big. Now I made you vanish. Okay, so on, let's see, on the last problem where it breaks it down really far, it has cash plus accounts receivable plus and then it equals it. It sort of spreads the whole accounting equation really far out. So that's what I was looking at this, trying to figure out that problem. Does that make sense?
Because I'm not sure what you're looking at.
Problem 3-2A.
Right. But
so if it said it occurred at expense, then I would have gone over to expense and put it in that column in this
you
problem.
should. So let's look at 3-2. I have it up, actually have it up on my screen right now. I know you can't see me.
If I can get you back in, I want to look.
Let's see.
See how there we go. Okay. Now I'm looking. Okay.
All right. So I'm trying to see if there's anywhere it says they incurred an expense.
Not on this one, they don't. They do it on the 3.1.
So here's the thing. If I incur an expense, there's only two things I can really do. Okay. One is I can pay for it now. So the journal entry would be to record the expense on the debit side and then reduce my cash by crediting cash. The second thing I could do is record the expense on the debit side but not pay cash, instead create a payable, meaning I still owe you for the services I received. And that's really about it. So if we have an expense, we're either going to credit cash or credit a payable, because we're either paying cash for it or we're paying for it in the future. And so usually it'll say something like paid $675 for office rent, like right here on number 2. Mm-hmm. So that one, I would do my rent expense on the debit side, or in other words, this doesn't have debits and credits, so I would just do the $675 over here, which is a reduction to retained earnings, so they want me to do it as a negative, and then my cash going down by $675. Yeah, there's some patterns you'll see as you work with this info more. You'll realize that anytime there's an expense, it's either if your debit is an expense, then your credit's either going to have to be cash or some type of account payable, because you can only pay for expenses one of two ways, with cash or by owing them. I mean, there's other weird exceptions, but that's the most common transactions. Anytime an asset goes up, I've either got to have another asset go down to pay for it, or a liability go up to pay for it, one or the other. Or, well, my stockholders' equity could go up too. If I contribute money to the business, my cash would go up and my common stock would go up too. But there's really a limited number of things that can happen, but it just takes time working with it to start to get a feel for that. In the beginning, it's just a lot of puzzling through it. Sorry, I talked a lot, Janice. What's your question?
Well, I can't click on this anywhere. So you had to choose whether it increased in assets, and there were a whole bunch of options. So I'm trying to understand what the answer for 6 is, if everyone else has done this homework. That is.
Okay, so wait, for 6?
On 3-1.
Okay, back to 3-1.
That's the incurred advertising.
Okay, so if we incur an advertising expense, we're going to have our liability going up because we've incurred an expense, but we haven't paid it yet. So we're going to owe money.
That's the notes payable or the
accounts payable. And
right.
then our stockholders' equity is going to go down because we have an expense.
Oh.
So the expense we record when we incur it, not necessarily when we pay it. So a lot of times we will, for example, we'll use our utilities all month long, but we don't pay them until next month. So we'll go ahead at the end of the month and record that we have incurred that expense, so our expense will decrease our stockholders' equity, but we haven't paid out the cash yet, so we have to put it as a payable instead, something we owe in the next month.
If you had to write that number 6 on a journal, like to put an entry, how would you write it down?
I would debit expense. Advertising expense would be a debit, and then I would credit advertising payable or accounts payable. Different businesses list it differently.
So they debit the expense.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I got confused.
It is, well, and again, the reason it's confusing is because when we increase an expense, that has the outcome of reducing the stockholders' equity. And so it's confusing because you think, wait, am I increasing it or am I decreasing it? So expenses, remember, stockholders' equity is revenue minus expenses, right? So it's our common stock plus revenue minus expenses minus dividends. So any increase to an expense is going to be a subtraction or a reduction to the retained earnings.
Let me just share something. Excuse me, I don't know if this is going to be helpful, but when I was actually doing this homework, I kept referring to that little diagram of what's supposed to go up and what's supposed to go down.
The one that he showed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's how exactly I figured it out. So I wasn't even trying to memorize it. I was just trying to see, okay, I know that expense will go up. So I know that this is the part that has to be the debit, not the credit.
Right. But what's confusing about it is it says decrease stockholders' equity. It doesn't say increase expense. And so you have to make the leap that increasing the expense decreases stockholders' equity. They're forcing you to make a jump. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, I can.
A kind of a conceptual leap.
I hope that one's not on the exam.
By the time you take it, you'll understand this so well. Watch.
One of the things that you're supposed to know for the next exam is how the 4 things that affect stockholders' equity,
okay,
and whether they increase it or decrease it.
Right. So that's go ahead.
So I have that dividends decrease it because you're taking stuff,
right.
You're paying stuff out, right?
Right.
Expenses decrease it.
Correct.
Revenues increase it because that's money coming in. And then the 4th thing is retained earnings, and that can either increase it.
So no, the 4th
or
thing
decrease it, right?
No.
Is that not one of the 4 things?
No,
That's
the 4th thing would be common stock. So which is contributions made by the owners, because retained earnings is actually a sum of the first 3 things. Retained earnings is revenue minus expenses minus dividends. That's what retained earnings is.
So the 4th thing is common stock.
Mm-hmm. So in essence, the owners can either put money into the business. That's common stock. Take money out of the business. That's dividends. Or the business can earn money. That's revenue. Or pay out money so earn money from operating, which is revenue, or pay money out for operating, and that's expenses. And those are the 4 things that impact our stock. I mean, our equity in the business.
So common stock can either increase it or decrease it.
No, I mean, not really.
No, that's when it would increase. Wait,
Right. Common stock
It would
increases
increase it because it's money they're paying into the business.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have a question?
I have a question on the part 2.
Okay. You mean the second
homework?
The second homework assignment?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and just before we do that, I was going to say, Janice, earlier Patricia said that she posted something, a tool that she'd used that was valuable. And to get to what she posted, you'll see on your Zoom controls, there's a place for a chat. And she posted it in the Zoom group chat. It's a screenshot of something that, what you said it was a tool for the debit credit rules, right, Patricia?
Yeah, that you shared in one of the links. I just screenshot the.
Right. I was just wanted to put that out there so that anybody who wanted it could find where it's at. All right, so let me close out of the first homework here because Wiley is kind of a punk about letting us have 2 windows open. I think it's dumb, by the way. That's my technical evaluation. It's dumb. I'll go back here, and then I'll go to the second.
I have a question, a technical question, I guess, about Wiley.
Okay.
So we're giving homework to work on, but they're not like, they're just a few homeworks, right? Like the number 11 and then 8 and then 19.
Right.
So where are the rest of these exercises? Is it, I wanted to see if there was like the digital.
Probably in the Orion part, right?
Right. So if you're saying like maybe you want to like see if there's additional work that would help you understand it more conceptually.
Yeah, but doing it on the computer, not on the paper.
Right. So real quick, sorry, Jesse, I'll come back to yours in just a minute because I think this is a quicker answer. So if I go to my modules and I go to my textbook access, Wiley Plus Read Study Practice. Oh, see, it's not letting me open it because I have another one open. But in there, there's Orion has a whole bunch of extra things you can work through.
I did. Like last week, I solved over 700 of those exercises.
You're an overachiever. That's good.
But they are nothing similar to the ones that they were on the exam. They're just like 3 or 4 options, but they weren't like to write a number or to. They're literally multiple answers.
So the things that are going to be closest to the things that are on, as far as in form and in shape, are going to be closest to what's on the exams are going to be those self-tests that I shared in my additional study content. Because I shared those because I felt like none of the study resources they give you mimic the test very well.
Okay.
And so those are the closest, and they come from Wiley. I went to their website and stole them from the previous version of the book.
I saw some that were similar, yes.
Yeah, and that's about the closest we're going to get.
Okay, but nothing like the homework. I was trying to find those that you fill in the blanks on a graph, or like, you know how you can select from a drop down menu. It's really just
right.
multiple
questions. So there's no access to say like additional problems.
Yeah.
Online. You could go to the ones in the book and do them by hand, but there's no access for additional online ones that would be more like these homework ones.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Jesse, which problem?
Exercise 3-19.
Okay.
So I tried this once and I got a majority of these wrong.
What the heck? Did you see that?
Yeah.
That was weird.
You might need to refresh your thing.
Also a technical term.
Yeah, the thing.
Let's see, refresh that thing. Let's see. So let me go back to it. I apologize.
You're okay.
Chapter 3, part 2. Open it in a new screen. 3-19. All right.
Yeah, so I kind of having a hard time with most of this. So number 2 there, the question is a debit posting of $590 for prepaid insurance was debited to insurance expense. So in balance, I would put yes. Is that correct?
Right.
And then there's no difference. And is that credited? Or for the larger column, do I put credit?
So in this case, it's none, because if there's
nothing. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
because what we should have done is debited insurance or debited prepaid insurance. But what we did do is debit insurance expense, meaning on our trial balance, we're going to have the correct balance at the bottom. It's just going to be in the wrong account. Does that help or no? In other words, if I was supposed to make a debit and my error is making a debit in the wrong account,
yeah,
that's not going to change the balance on the trial balance. I'll
still have still on the assets. Okay.
Still on the debit side.
Right. Sorry, debit. Yeah. All right. Do you mind if we go through a couple more of these?
Nope, that's fine.
Okay. So number 3, a collection on account of 230 was journalized and posted as a debit to cash for 230 and a credit to accounts payable 230. So, so this is not in balance, right? Because they're putting 230 all over the place.
Well, no. So in balance means that we debit and credit the same amount. So if we debited 230 and credited 230, on mine it's 220 that's on the screen, but then our trial balance is still in balance as long as we debited and credited the same amount. So the only type of error that would get us out of balance is if we debit, one amount in the and credit another amount.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Right, because they have to equal each other. Okay.
Right.
All right. So the difference then, so it is in balance then.
Right.
Okay.
And so there can only be a difference if the answer is no. Okay. So difference is blank if the answer is yes. So what they're asking us first is our trial balance still in balance? And so if we debit and credit the same amount, then the answer is yes, we're still in balance. And then then the second question is there a difference? And if we're in balance, there's no difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for any of the questions where the answer is yes for in balance, there'll be nothing in the difference, and it'll be none in the larger column because there is no difference between the two columns.
Okay.
Does that help a little?
Yeah. Okay. So 4, then we are in balance, and there's no. Okay. So then in 6.
No. So in 4.
I'm sorry. In 5, there's. I got number 4 right on mine.
Okay. Yeah. In 4, we're in balance, and so it's going to be yes blank for difference and none for larger column.
Yeah. Okay. Number 6 says a debit of. So my number is 385, but to advertising expense was posted as 358. So for me, that's $27 difference. So I put no, difference of 27, and then that's to credit. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
That's all right.
I think what you're doing is scaring all the people who haven't started homework part 2.
It's getting kind of quiet over there.
Janice has this concerned look on her face.
Oh.
Like, it'll be easy when you get there, Janice. You'll be like,
it's really not bad. Yeah.
I've come through the journey this far, and now that I've journeyed, and once you're at the top of the mountain, you look back and say, oh, why am I so sweaty? That wasn't that bad.
I haven't started 2 yet. I just barely finished 1, but my son came home from his mission on Tuesday, so
cool.
I did no homework on Tuesday.
Yeah, my kid came home from his mission. I was like, hey, welcome home. I got stuff to do. See you. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the dad response.
I did my exam Monday so that I would have. I gave myself Tuesday. Is what I did.
Right. So Jesse, did you have anything else to that?
Just kind of, yeah. So the last question or problem from 3-8A. So I'm not quite sure what to do with this. So am I filling out the dates here in the first column?
Right.
Okay.
So what it's having us do is, let me see if I can, no.
I spent hours on that problem, mainly because of the second part of the March 31st, where I had to put like where I had to fill in the information. The 31st, on the day 31st is not. It was really hard for me to figure out what I had to do. And
Is there 3 different entries?
Not on letter A, the letter B.
Oh,
right there, because it has 3 different entries, and it's not very clear the way that they worded it.
Okay.
I actually missed that part. I already finished the second homework, and I just, after 2 hours of trying to figure it out, I just kind of gave up on it. So I lost 2 points on that last part. But yeah,
it was really hard. Yeah,
the way it was worded, it was like really hard for me to figure out which one. I figured out the cash part, but the other I didn't figure out.
Yeah.
Okay, so would it be instructive for me to? I mean, you guys already missed it, but
on the top you'll read the date 31st all the way to the top. Yeah, right there.
So on the 31st, we have 3 different things happening, right? Was it because you didn't realize you were supposed to do 3 separate entries for it that confused you, Patricia?
No, because what happened is that he lets the guy use the concession stand, and then he charges him rent. But I thought it was like, where is the rent? But it's actually like a percentage of it's like a commission. I think that's what the agreement was. And I was like confused.
So received a statement from Laszlo showing gross receipts from concessions of $11,800 and a balance due to the TriQuil of $1,770, which is the $11,800 times 15%. For March, Laszlo paid half the balance due of the rental of the concession stand and will remit the remainder on April 5th. What they're doing here is throwing in a bunch of obfuscating information, right? A bunch of things to just sort of confuse the whole process, because you're thinking, well, how does this 11,800 factor in? And the answer is it doesn't really, except to figure out how much they owe, which is 11,800 times the 15% commission rate, which was told up here on the 11th. So anyway, so once we know that it's 1770, I know you guys have probably figured this out, but maybe someone else watching this will be valuable for. So once we figured out by taking 11,800 times 15% that we owe 1770, and then it says we paid half of it now and we're going to pay half of it later. So we're going to incur the full rent expense. So our debit is going to be to debit rent expense, this is revenue. We're going to earn the full rent revenue of $1,770. So we're going to credit our rent revenue $1,770, and then we're going to show our cash increasing by half of that amount because we got paid half of it up front. And then our accounts receivable increasing by the other half because we're not going to get paid that until next month. And so I get why that is a much more complex transaction than most of the rest of them on this exercise.
Now that you're explaining it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so easy. Why was it so hard for me to figure out?
I feel like one of the things with accounting is that people like talk themselves into making it harder than it is. It's like it's so easy to sort of like start talking yourself into a circle and in the end go, none of that makes sense at all, when a lot of times it's really simpler than what it seems.
So when you're typing those things in, do you have to put the spaces like that?
These are drop downs.
They're drop downs,
I believe.
okay.
Are they type in or drop down, guys?
Right now I'm just typing in the filling.
You have to type.
Oh, you have to type them in.
Yeah.
When you type it in, does it like show you some choices? Like, does it predictive text?
It does. Okay. Yeah, that's another thing. It's not very like you have to write rent. Like you have to start typing rent for the movie.
Right.
So like for the movie theater will buy the rights to show the Star Wars movie, you have to write rent, like rent expense.
Right.
That was something that I was confused too. Like I was like, how do you? Yeah, but I eventually figured out.
So who was it that said, someone said that would have been helpful before. So hopefully it's helpful to those who are trying to navigate through this problem in the future. So Janice, when you get to this one, maybe you can roll back on this recording and be like, I remember we talked about that.
I probably will.
Any other questions? Or well, Jesse, did we get your questions?
Yeah. So yeah, that helped me answer letter A. I'm just kind of looking at letter B right now. So the one that you have open.
Right.
So I'm not asking to go through it, but that does help me kind of start it.
Okay. Yeah. So any other questions that we can answer before we finish up? We are at about an hour, so I know some of you are probably reaching your limit. I last for about, well, like sacrament meeting is particularly long for me, and that's even the new shorter version. So I still gotta. And the kids in my ward are brutal. Like, you know how you're not supposed to take pictures in the chapel? I one time closed my eyes for about 30 seconds.
And they took a picture of you.
They took a picture of me up on the stand, and then we have a priest quorum group chat, and they share the picture to it, and it just says, "It's rough," like that on there. And so there's no mercy in our priest quorum. Anyway, Janice, what were you going to ask?
This doesn't have to do with the homework, and you already said that we could use a scratch paper. Because the whiteboard is atrocious on the test, on the exams. Can we use a whiteboard so that we can erase stuff and have more space to write if we show both sides of a little whiteboard? Or
I don't care. Whatever works best for scratch paper for you. That's
because I started and I had scratch paper. I'm like, oh, then I read it said, this is what you have to use. So I was like,
no, it's frustrating. And like I said, so did any of you use scratch paper on the exam or something where you were looking down writing on
I did. Something? I wrote down a number. The one problem that I was like, I need to ask him about this because I felt it was like worded really poorly. So I grabbed my pen and I wrote down number 31 on the paper, and then right there on the left side of the screen, a chat box popped up and said, I feel like you have a question. Do you want to ask us a question?
And you were like big brothers watching me. Yeah. Well, so just so you know, I've already received my report for the exam, and the report said that among all the students, there was not a single exception. So in other words, it has to be, what will happen is the process that happens is it watches you. And then if it looks like if the system thinks your eyes are leaving the screen for too long, or if you're bringing something up on another window, and I've caught guys cheating in this class. Usually they'll bring up another window and Google something, and you're like, why? That was like the dumbest thing. Then what it will do is it will send like an exception report to the instructor, and then there'll be a link, and I can link and actually watch the video. And if it looks like someone really is reading off of notes or something, then usually I give that person a call. So there's a whole lot of layers before you're going to get in trouble. You know what I mean? So
you can watch mine. It says, I hate this whiteboard.
Yeah, although the whiteboard's terrible. So
it stinks.
It both stinks and sucks simultaneously.
Yes. So can we use our own calculator, or do we have to use the system's own calculator?
I used my own.
Yeah, you can use a calculator.
Okay, because when I was reading the instruction, I didn't see that you can. So I was too afraid to use my own calculator, so I just kind of sucked.
What's hard though is that somebody is gonna use these exceptions we're making to try to make it easier for you to cheat, right? They're gonna show a piece of blank scratch paper and then have their notes sitting down on the table next to it. We can't get all, if someone wants to cheat, they'll find a way. Like if your mama didn't teach you to do it right, then anything we say is not going to change that. But it is a reasonable safeguard. And that's actually the same reason they have this policy that's so frustrating to students of no review on the exams, because they're trying to protect the integrity of the exam. You know, I teach for Arizona State University, and every test any professor has ever given at ASU is pretty much like immediately uploaded to the web, so people can find. You can go find them, and so, you know, there's always somebody who's going to cheat, and so we're trying to be reasonable, but sometimes I think I get frustrated by the rules because I have to be the keeper of them as the faculty member, even though I wish people could review their exams. I think you learn a lot by reviewing your exam.
Yeah, I have a last question.
Okay.
They said you can use a calculator, but can I like the Desmos calculator that's online, because you can go back to with whatever number you want. Like you can just move the mouse and go back to the number if you made a mistake. You don't have to erase the whole equation or the whole thing. So I used that one online. So, but last exam, it made me close all the windows.
Yeah, I would not try to open another window. I think that's something that for sure is going to get an exception report created, because, you know, without additional layers of digging, it's just going to look like you're opening some other website, because you are, right, when you open that up.
Yeah.
So I would not do it.
Okay.
Even though it's your favorite calculator.
It is.
Okay, I have one
like
question
anything
here.
else.
Okay.
If we do use our own calculator, do we have to show that or how does that work?
That'd probably be fine if you just did that.
Exactly. I don't think you have to, but I think any effort to be like, hey, look, I'm an honest, law-abiding citizen, you know, is not a bad thing. So, if you know, because I'm guessing what happens is there's probably another layer in between what the computer does and them sending it to me. Is there's probably a human being that each time something gets flagged, they look at it. And so if it's clear to them you're just punching something in on your calculator, then they don't even send it on to me. So the short answer is I would. Why not? Go ahead and say, yeah, I have scratch paper and a calculator. I'm using them for this exam. If you don't like it, tell my instructor. And
I just want to use a whiteboard, just because, you know, your scratch paper you use up quickly.
So here's the safest way, Janice, is you get like a big whiteboard that like the one I have behind me. See mine?
Yeah.
Well,
and then no one can say I'm using scratch paper because I'm like going back here and like writing on it. But I think that'd be kind of an extreme way to deal with this little issue.
I do have a relatively large whiteboard.
Well. But
I don't think I need that big of a whiteboard, because you can wipe it off and do a new problem.
I think we're worrying about this more than is requisite. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. And if something did pop up before you ever got in trouble, there'd be a conversation happening and we'd figure out what was going on. So, you know, so unless you're really cheating, then it's a big deal and we're coming for you. But if you're not cheating, we're good. I don't know who's coming. Nobody's really coming for you, just saying.
I was able to use my computer on it. My husband helped me shut a bunch of stuff down. I didn't have 2 gigabytes still, but it worked.
All right, well, good.
I had like 1.5, so hopefully it keeps working.
All right. Anything else? Are we ready for a prayer? I see Toro had to leave. I think he was going to get busted. He was at work. It's 10 a.m. in Japan tomorrow, and he was at work, and somebody walk in and be like, "What are you doing?" Chatting with all those Americans over there.
Is it Patricia who's on here?
Yes.
I loved her presentation.
Oh,
that was awesome.
You. Thank you. Yours too. You presented the other one, right?
Yeah.
I liked yours too.
And unless the rest of you are saying, I never got to see theirs, recognize that you're split into 5 groups. And so, you know.
Well, I think Patricia and I are in the same group.
Right.
Yeah.
The technical term for Patricia's presentation was dope, like that. It was it was fresh to death. I don't know what it was. It was really good.
Fresh.
I don't know. She covered the answers up, and I'm like, how'd you do that?
Yeah. All right.
That was pretty cool.
Well, is anybody willing to volunteer for a closing prayer? Come on, you know you want to. Do I have to just call on someone? Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Ging, you're the one that you reacted first. No, you did. This is totally like being in a young men, young women class. Like whoever makes the first noise has to say the prayer. I mean, gets the blessings.
Gets to.
Our dear kind Heavenly Father, we are so much thankful for this day, and we're thankful for all of our many blessings, and we're thankful that we're able to figure out some of the homework assignment, and we are very much thankful for Brother Fox that he's able to help us learn all these materials, and we ask you to please help us have a good rest of our night and have a good rest of our week, and that we're able to retain all the information that we have learned, and believe all these things in Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Amen. All right, Ging, I want you to, I want to ask you to